Hi, everyone, and welcome back to On the Right Side of History with Kansans for Life. I'm Danielle Underwood, your host. Just weeks after the historic election of Pope Leo XIV, the first ever American to lead the Catholic Church, many are wondering how this new world leader will impact the fight to protect life in the U.S. and abroad. Today, we're joined by Alan Holdren, former EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief in Rome, and continuing periodic reporter for EWTN Global Catholic Network. We'll explore what we know so far about Pope Leo's stances on life issues, how his early formation at Villanova and his mission work in Peru shaped his views, and what his newfound prominence could mean for the pro-life movement going forward. Stay with us. No matter your faith tradition or background, this is a conversation you won't want to miss. Welcome, Alan, and thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Danielle.
So, Alan, you spent more than 10 years in Rome working for EWTN, covering the Vatican and related world affairs. And I'm wondering what your sense is about the world's initial reaction to Cardinal Robert Prevost's election as the 267th leader of the Catholic Church as Pope Leo XIV.
Yeah, Danielle, what I see when I read his works, when I speak to people here, when I speak to people back in Rome, is a lot of hope. You could see it in people's faces when they had the first audiences with, I guess it is very election. It's hard not to be hopeful and excited, though, if you're there at the election. That's quite a moment when he steps out on the balcony. And it was such a surprise, I think, to all of us that it was an American Pope. It was a surprise to him as well. He had texted a friend of his saying, "I'm an American, I'm not going to be Pope." And here he steps out on the balcony to the surprise and shock of everyone, including him. And as I looked at some of the faces in the crowd, a lot of friends of mine that met with him during his meeting with media, that was just shortly after his election, I saw a lot of hope in their faces. They're people I know, when they're working, there's a lot of hard work that goes on behind the scenes in media, as you know. And what I saw was just, some sense of relief. We have a Pope again. From both people that work for the Vatican media and also people that just cover the Vatican for other media organizations. And as they had the opportunity to shake his hand and to say a few words with him, I saw him very comfortable and at peace, which is what you want. And even despite the burdens of the papacy, it is a difficult thing, and that's why we need to pray for him. But I also saw so much hope in the eyes of the people speaking with him. And the beautiful thing is knowing that I read somewhere that this is the second Pope in history to be speaking the English language as his native tongue. So I saw a lot of people who would have required an interpreter to speak with him that had come from America or other places to cover the election of the Pope, who were speaking to him as if speaking to an old friend. So that possibility, I don't think, should be underestimated, that we have a Pope now that can speak freely off the cuff in his native tongue in English and speak to the majority of the world that now speak English as a first or second language. And there's hope in that.
That is exciting. And I understand that he is multilingual. Is that correct? How many?
Yeah,
do you happen to know how many languages he speaks?
I know that he speaks 4 fluently. So there's Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and English. And then there's a little bit of German and then some Latin. And if you've heard him celebrate Mass, his Latin is beautiful. His pronunciation, I speak Spanish and Italian as well. His pronunciation is fantastic. He doesn't need a prepared text to give a complete address in those languages. So it's really impressive. And his accent sounds pretty neutral. He spent a lot of time abroad and in different roles serving internationally. So I can see that he had the opportunities, but it is a real gift to be able to speak that well.
That is an incredible gift. And I've heard that from others as well who commented on his near perfect Italian. Just thinking about all the languages, trying to master that and keep them separate in your mind, that is an incredible gift.
Oh, yeah.
So we know that he has had a pretty consistent, just the way he speaks on life issues has been consistent and continuous through his years as a priest, a bishop, and a cardinal, and now we're excited to see what he'll be saying as Pope. But I'd like to go back to his early formative years, and I know that he began his studies as a young man at Villanova University here in Pennsylvania. And I'm wondering, what have you been able to find about his early formation there, and how it might have shaped his views on life and human dignity?
Yeah, so there isn't a whole lot out there that I've seen so far. I'm sure that'll be coming out in different books as people do more research into his life. He was largely, it seems, sort of behind the scenes, or at least kind of quiet, even during his time as superior, as the prior general of the Augustinian order. But in his time there at Villanova, I know that he was a part of the Villanovans for Life, a group that was founded shortly after Roe versus Wade was decided in the 1970s. He, I believe, graduated in 1977 from Villanova with a math degree. And he was already an Augustinian at that point. He had been through Augustinian studies throughout all of his high school years. And so it wasn't a spirituality that was foreign to him. Villanova is an Augustinian institution. To explain that, I guess, the Augustinians are an order within the Catholic Church that follow in the footsteps of St. Augustine, who lived, I believe, in the 5th century. He became a bishop in North Africa. He was a convert to the Catholic faith, I guess a revert. His mother prayed for him his entire life, and he was just an incredible speaker. And he basically set out a rule called the Augustinian rule for people that would follow in his footsteps, that's still used today by the Augustinian order and others that take their inspiration from that order and from him. He's a towering intellectual figure in the Catholic Church and in philosophy in general. And so that is a huge part of the fundamental spirituality and I guess the intellectual tradition that this Pope has, is that he's basing his decisions on, and his reasoning on the logic of this huge philosopher in history. And so if at any point we have our listeners have an opportunity to read Confessions or The City of God, which are some of Augustine's most well-known works, there's a huge body of letters as well that are still available from that time, even though it's so long ago, where he's speaking about this encounter with Christ, and the things that really drove him, the things that motivated him, were this insatiable curiosity, but also a thirst for Christ. And that's he only found his answers to these big questions in life in the church and in Jesus Christ, and that's been passed down through time. There's a famous quote, we don't find rest until we rest in you, speaking about Christ. And that's something that probably many people have heard and maybe didn't know that traced back to Augustine. And so Pope Leo XIV was trained in that tradition. They speak a lot about love and about unity, and that's a part of the charism and part of the sort of founding elements, the core values of the Augustinians, in addition to unity.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you brought that quote up, because that was popping into my mind just as you were saying it. And it made me think about how, Augustine really was very, very intent on having a personal relationship with Christ, and having a personal relationship with God too. So this towering thinker, like you said, but also a very personal connection to God. And so, if he's following in those footsteps, that's an interesting blend of, spirituality that he will be bringing with him into this papacy. So one thing I wanted to bring up before we left the Villanova conversation, I noticed as I was looking for more information about this, that the Villanovans for Life, unsurprisingly, were extremely excited about his election as Pope. And they put up an Instagram post that I thought was pretty neat. And they just talked about how, as while he was still Prevost, he contributed immensely with his active presence, especially during the March for Life, talking about their organization. And they said that our founders and current members are absolutely overjoyed that we get to witness a Villanovan for Life make history today as the first American and Augustinian Pope. So they were undoubtedly very excited to have that connection to him. And I just thought it was wonderful.
Everyone claims their connections, right?
Of
After
course.
you get a new pope, you're like,
yeah.
I know him.
That's very true. Yep. A lot of people coming out of the woodwork. But it's nice to see that very firm connection between him and a student organization that is still dedicated to promoting respect for life. So a very exciting connection there. So then, he continued through his life, I understand that he had a strong pull to become a missionary in Peru, and that for whatever reason, and I haven't heard any kind of story about, what led to that passion of his, but that he really desired to go and work in those conditions. And I think among marginalized people, and I'm not sure all the reasons, but what do you happen to know about that piece of his history?
So the Augustinian order is divided up into provinces that cover the entire world. So everywhere that they are present, they would have a structure, and they would have priests there, presumably, that would be carrying out the Augustinian charism, reaching out to people with that sense of love and unity and that sense of mission. And so I believe he was called down to Peru to work in their structure there. I don't know specifically why Peru. That's a great question. But he ended up being there in charge of the seminary, and he got a lot of experience. It said what I read is that he mastered Spanish quite quickly, and he became an integral part of the local milieu. So it's not just that he was there in an office doing work on behalf of the Augustinians. He was out in the community. He served in roles in parishes. He eventually, I think he was the prior down there as well, I believe. And so he took on leadership roles in a place where he's serving as a missionary from the United States, working in a foreign country. And all of that really built his credibility there locally, so that he was a very respected person. They said that he didn't speak Spanish like the other American missionaries. He spoke Spanish as a local, and he really became a part of that local place. He didn't spend his entire career there. He ended up being called back to Chicago. He did some work there, which included becoming the superior general of the prior general of the Augustinian order. So that was a 12-year stint that really took him all across the globe. So in recent public address, it's publicly available, but it was an address to diplomats accredited to the Holy See, which the Holy See is second only to the United States in the number of diplomats accredited to it. So you're talking more than 180 nations on earth that have representatives there. So speaking to them, he talked about the beauty of having visited many of the countries that they were from already. Imagine that great value, that benefit that brings to the pontificate, that he knows a lot of the situations in their countries. He's not just an American and actually a Peruvian citizen, but he's also, he knows what's going on in the world. What a huge gift that is to the church. Mm-hmm. And eventually, after serving as the superior general, he actually went back to Peru and was ordained a bishop. And that's when he became a citizen of Peru, because you have to be a citizen in order to be a bishop in Peru. And he served as Bishop of Chiclayo, a diocese there, kind of off the beaten track. He was known to go out and visit people by horseback into difficult to reach places, and eventually made it back to Rome, was called to Rome by Pope Francis to be in charge of the Congregation for Bishops, the Dicastery for Bishops, which advises the Pope, helps the Pope to place bishops, ordain bishops in different dioceses across the Western world. So not only all of those things has he done, but he's also been a teacher. He's also worked, I believe, in spiritual direction. He has worked in everything, mission work, diocese, the Roman Curia. He's a student of life. He's a towering intellectual. I mean, it is really an interesting profile to be brought into a position like this.
How true indeed. So we know that especially his having citizenship in both the United States and Peru, I understand that was, in some people's thoughts, that was central to him actually being elected as Pope. What can you explain that part of this to our listeners?
Yeah. An interesting fact. After he was elected, Cardinal Dolan of New York, Timothy Dolan, gave an interview, and he was asked, what did you know about Cardinal Prevost? How well did you know him in advance? And he said, before I arrived in Rome for the funeral of Pope Francis, and that's when they have these meetings called general congregations where all the cardinals get together once a day, and they speak about the status of the church. They get to know each other, talk about the challenges, talk about what they'll be looking for as they go to vote for the new pope. Cardinal Dolan said, I don't know him. When people asked him, they came up to him the moment he arrived, because he said he arrived a couple days late. He had other things to take care of, and the congregations had already started. And people came up to him from all over the world and said, what do you know about Cardinal Prevost? He's like, I really don't know anything. I've never met him. An American cardinal that had never met this other American cardinal. That's how far off the grid, in a sense, Cardinal Prevost was. He had spent his life as a bishop in South America. He was a prior general, so a superior of a religious community, which is not a part of the regular diocesan structure of the United States. So that idea that his Peruvian citizenship and that sort of experience abroad made him a sort of an outsider to internal diocesan structures in the United States. They were looking for a consensus, for sure, as they always will for any papal election. You want everybody, as many people as possible, to be in agreement with who you're going to have as pope, and that's why they have, the 2/3 majority that's got to vote for the new pope, because you want as many people on board as possible, obviously. And he was that, I'm sure that led to him being a preferred candidate for many people, or at least a person worthy of consideration. Whereas Americans up until now had always considered that they weren't even candidates, because you didn't want to, put the papacy in the hands of an American, which would have so many temptations, maybe for geopolitical power to sort of line up with the major world power of the United States. At least that was the idea. Even Cardinal Dolan, in an interview that he gave before the election, he said, an American like me, there's no chance I'll ever be pope.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm sure it helped to lessen some fears that some of those cardinals may have had about, him having this American background, knowing all those connections he has across the world. So one interesting thing I was able to find is that while he was still in Peru, so in 2015, Prevost, while still bishop in, is it Chiclayo?
Chiclayo.
Peru. He posted a photograph from their country's March for Life, and they have a rally there, and he exhorted his followers on social media saying, let's defend human life at all times. So I think, he unabashedly came out as a very pro-life bishop and very supportive of that effort. So another interesting data point as we, look at his previous words, what he has said. And I don't get the impression that he was very active on social media, but that he did have some posts that he would do, or he would repost. And you had mentioned Cardinal Dolan a couple times. I believe that he reposted some words of Cardinal Dolan that were also very pro-life in nature. So he obviously was, not like you're saying, not just a prolific in his words, not just speaking all the time, but when he did, he spoke words that were solid and mattered and were always pro-life.
If I could, Danielle, I'd bring up two things in that regard. In Peru, the March for Life was actually sort of suppressed. It stopped happening after a new archbishop came in, and he decided in Lima that wasn't something that they were going to continue doing. And so the fact that he did post something like that is interesting, because and he held a high-ranking position within the Bishops' Conference of Peru, which is interesting. Again, an expat there and in a very prominent leadership position. But that I haven't seen that, and I don't know exactly precisely when that post was made, but it was not always popular among the bishops of Peru to be a part of that National March for Life. It was enormous. And I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of people. And from one day to the next, the new archbishop said, we're not going to do that anymore, which was a surprise to a lot of people. So for him to stand up and do that, that's an interesting fact. The other thing I wanted to bring up, if I can remember it here. Oh, yeah. So if, as I was looking into all of the different speeches that he has given over the course of this last month, there's a key quote that I want to, I'll just read it if you'd like. It's from the Pope's meeting with diplomats on May the 16th. And so I'd already referred to that. This is when he gets together with all of the diplomats accredited to the Holy See. So they're the representatives of their countries, and there are more than 180 of them that are all meeting with him for the first time in that capacity. They would have been at his inaugural mass, which they wouldn't have had the opportunity to speak with him quite yet. So this is his first message to them, and this is in the context of, imploring peace, imploring ceasefire in Ukraine, talking about the ways that they can work together. And he brings up this key quote, which does speak to his sort of the fundamental stance that he has for life. He says, it's the responsibility of government leaders to work to build harmonious and peaceful civil societies. This can be achieved above all by investing in the family, founded upon the stable union between a man and a woman, a small but genuine society, and prior to all civil society. In addition, no one is exempted from striving to ensure respect for the dignity of every person, especially the most frail and vulnerable, from the unborn to the elderly, from the sick to the unemployed, citizens and immigrants alike. So this is a big stage. He's speaking to every nation on earth and to the representatives that every president in the world that's has an accredited presence to the Holy See. He's speaking to them and saying, every person has dignity, from the unborn to the elderly. Mm-hmm. That resonates.
That definitely resonates. I believe, and I don't think I brought it with me, but I know I've also seen him speak about people with disabilities with the same sentiment, just making sure that we treat every human life as equal in dignity. So very consistent ethic on life. And just to back up, you mentioned that Cardinal Dolan had not met him before, but he really was only a cardinal for a couple years before he's been elevated now to Pope. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Okay. So he was brought to Rome in 2023 to lead the Congregation for Bishops that advises the Pope on the Western world. So there's the mission territories, Africa, Asia, I believe Oceania as well, that is overseen by a different dicastery, a different Vatican department. The Congregation for Bishops, now known as the Dicastery for Bishops, looks to the Western world and helps the Pope to, and also there's the Pontifical Commission for Latin America, so it helps the Pope to advise on the Americas and Europe. And so it was a newer role for him. Bishops come through once every 5 years. Traditionally, sometimes it takes a little bit longer, on visits to Rome as groups from their respective nations. So they're called ad limina apostolorum visits. That's to the threshold of the apostles. They're coming to visit the tombs of Saints Peter and Paul in Rome, and then the successor of Peter as well. And they meet with different Vatican departments. That's when, if you've never met someone that's the head of a dicastery in Rome, the head of a Vatican department, that's when you have that opportunity as a bishop to do so, if you haven't already been introduced. So it's clear that Cardinal Dolan and others from the United States hadn't had that opportunity in the time that he had been there.
Very interesting. Yeah, I found another quote from him that I had found from a recent homily of his while he was a cardinal. So this had to have been in the last couple years. And he said, God's mercy calls us to protect every life, especially those society overlooks, the child yet to be born and the elderly nearing their journey's end, because each bears Christ's face. So really, unequivocally, outspokenly pro-life. Another one, this is actually the one that I had been looking for. We cannot build a just society if we discard the weakest, whether the child in the womb or the elderly in their frailty, for they are both gifts from God. So that's very, very encouraging for those of us who, the pro-life fight is near and dear to our hearts, that someone on the world stage like this, speaking with world leaders, daily, that this is going to be the message that we can only expect will continue to be reverberating across the globe to these different leaders and those conversations. So do we happen to know, so you mentioned the one address that he gave to members of the press. You said members of the press, is that right? Mm-hmm. Do we know if there have been any other instances, and it's been such a short time, so probably there may not be, any other times that he's spoken about either abortion or euthanasia since becoming Pope, and any other Anything else we know about language he's using?
Not yet. I haven't come across them. If he has, it may have happened in private conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Any of his speeches, any of his addresses, prepared remarks are available at the Vatican's website, which is vatican.va, and you can go through and you can check everything there. I have not come across anything that specifically references euthanasia and abortion, just that defense of the unborn to the elderly. And that would be reading between the lines, I guess, at this point. But he will have opportunities to speak more clearly on and more specifically on those issues. I did come across something that he said at his inaugural mass. Well, at the taking of possession of St. John Lateran, which is the bishop of Rome's cathedral. He is the bishop of Rome as the Pope, and so he was there just the other day. And there is something, I think. This speaks to, I think, the clarity that we will find when he does have the opportunity to speak very specifically on those issues. We shouldn't be surprised if he's very straightforward about it. And if I could just read this again, it's very short. He says, naturally, the more we let ourselves be convinced and transformed by the gospel, allowing the power of the Spirit to purify our heart, to make our words straightforward, our desires honest and clear, and our actions generous, the more capable we are of proclaiming its message. He's driven by Christ in the footsteps of St. Augustine to speak clearly. And I think that's just going. He said it in another meeting that he had just within the last 2 weeks. He hasn't been Pope for that long, just since May the 8th, right? But he said to a group, it was an ecumenical group, I'm paraphrasing, we don't do ourselves any favors by beating around the bush. We need to speak clearly to each other, even if it hurts at first.
Wow. That will be very interesting to see. Not a lot of flowery language, but very direct, very, very pointed. And I think our world could really use that kind of voice right now. So very, very interesting. I'm glad you brought up the place where people can go and read his actual words, because, one of the things that's so frustrating that, we know that media spin is a real thing. And, we saw that happen innumerable times with Pope Francis and other popes. Sometimes their words are cast in certain lights, and it's hard to read through all of the story surrounding it and get to the actual meaning. So people can actually go and read his direct words. And again, could you repeat that website for us?
Yeah, so it's vatican.va, and you can look up just vatican.va in a Google search, and then Pope Leo XIV, and it'll take you to a page where you'll see all of the different addresses. You just have to click on a couple. There's on the left-hand margin, it says audiences, Angelus or Regina Coeli addresses, general audiences, speeches, and you click on those. It'll have his travels there eventually when he takes travels. And that's my kind of go-to resource. When I read an article, I usually, see the article first and it says something, and then you go to the original words, and man, that's in the context of so many other things. And that's an issue, a difficult thing for media personnel, as you know as well, is you've got to lead with something. You've got to have something that pulls people in as a hook. And often that title will just be one small part of the whole. So it may be surprising to people to go in. I would recommend his speech to the diplomatic corps, just to get an idea of what he's looking to do. This is my last one. Right? One other thing that he said, just very clearly in the Mass to begin his pontificate. This is on May the 18th, so just days ago. He said, "Brothers and sisters, I would like that our first great desire be for a united church, a sign of unity and communion, which becomes a leaven for a reconciled world." He wants us to live out our faith where we are, and he wants people to take notice in the sense that we're being good neighbors, we're loving the people around us, and people ask themselves, how is that possible? What are they doing differently? And this is the message of every pope, I hope, since the time of Christ, since the time of St. Peter, is that we are meant to be a sign of contradiction in this world. And if I look around Kansas, as you and I have gotten to know each other over these last few years, and we look at the Value in Both Amendment, which was a disappointment, but we think about, I think of myself first. How many people have I spoken to, about the the respect for life that I have, or about how life demands respect. How many people am I witnessing to in my daily life? And I think that for the great majority of us in Kansas, we think we do that. But then if we think about it for a second, pray about it, we're like, well, there are more opportunities there. And if the Value Them Both amendment came up again, if something similar to it came up, would we be able to achieve that this time? How is it that our state constitution enshrines a right to abortion? It's not only insanity, it's diabolical. What can we do to do God's work here, to be his voice in his hands?
Mm-hmm. Yes, those are some excellent marching orders for us to take a look inward and see what we need to do and what we need to say to those around us. So you mentioned and you used quite a few Catholic words, and not everyone is going to be familiar with some of those, the different speeches that he gives and the different audiences and things. Mm-hmm. What other upcoming occasions may we hear him speak about life issues? Or, what should we be watching for in terms of types of writings he might put out, or other things where we may see him speak to these issues more directly?
Yeah, so this year is a special year in the Catholic Church. It's called a Jubilee year. It takes place every 25 years. It could take place at other times too if there's an extraordinary Jubilee, which actually Pope Francis called in 2016. That was the Jubilee Year of Mercy. This year is the Jubilee of Hope, he's called for. So it started with Francis. It ends now with Pope Leo. He has millions, literally millions of people coming to Rome in different groups. And so there will be groups, say youth groups, that will come for the Jubilee of Youth. There's the Jubilee of Military has already been, the Jubilee for the sick and disabled. There will be opportunities this year, I'm sure, dedicated to causes for life. Right off the top of my head, I don't have specific dates or groups in mind. But there is also a March for Life that happens in Rome. Interestingly, it's hard to find, whereas here marches for life often have the explicit approval of the bishop. In Rome and in Italy, it's a different cultural and political context, and often the bishops do not, acting bishops do not show up for those marches for life. That's a complicated thing that maybe we could talk about another time. But in part, it's because of the close relationship between the church and the state owns many of the churches there. And so they don't want to put that in jeopardy, the state aid, which you don't want to be in the hands of somebody else. So there's something to be talked about there. We'll see. There is the Pontifical Academy for Life in Rome. They have what they call plenary meetings. So they bring in all of their members, which come from across the world. And they meet together for conferences. And then oftentimes the Pope will call them into the Apostolic Palace, which is his house. And he will give them some sort of an address, and he'll speak with them. So they're the public words that we would have access to. I would expect that as young as he is and as energetic as he seems, there will be so many opportunities for him to speak out and to use the platform that he has, which he has called both a burden and a blessing. Burden because of the humanity of it. He's just a human being, and it's a crushing weight of all the expectations. But there is the grace of God there, and we saw it, with Pope Francis. He would just enliven in front of people, I believe that will be the same for our Pope now. Is that he's a man of prayer, a man of holiness, and he will step up to this with the knowledge that what he says makes a difference. And there's so many people waiting for him to speak very clearly on these issues.
Yeah, and I think it'll be very interesting to see if he comes forward with some encyclicals about life issues. I mean, his predecessors, going further back, John Paul II and Pope Paul VI, Humanae Vitae and the Gospel of Life, and these incredibly beautiful, rich writings about respecting life and why. Why is it so important to have this consistent, from the womb to the tomb ethic of respecting every human life? Why does that make sense? And why does any infringement on that, lead to so many, sometimes unintended, horrible repercussions, other evils come from that. So it'll be very interesting to see what he writes, what he says, and, just even off the cuff remarks he makes to reporters. And there'll be so many opportunities. And of course, there'll be a lot of attention constantly focused on him. So I can only imagine how difficult that would be to live under a microscope like that.
Yeah, you offer up your life. I think that when you speak about encyclicals, and you think about these are letters to the people of God and to people of goodwill. So anybody out there that's willing to lend an ear, basically. And they are documents that speak to the priorities of a pontificate. So whatever his priorities are, he has said in the Mass to be in his pontificate that our first desire should be for a united church, a sign of unity and communion. That would be potentially an opportunity to speak to, that common goal of us living together as Christians of all denominations, and getting on board for certain issues. Those documents are divided up into different paragraphs that all have numbers, and they all take on something different. So there could be, a few of those, or even just one paragraph dedicated to causes for life and being united on that front. One thing that I should bring up is that Pope Leo's motto is in Latin, in illo uno unum, which means in him we are one. That's how close that is to his heart. So I would imagine that would be one of his first documents, if you were to admit one. It seems to be his first priority.
Well, we won't place any bets on that, but I think that sounds like it sounds like a great title. I think he should definitely do that. So hopefully he's listening to our podcast and he's going to jump right on that for us. What do you think?
Yeah, we could send it on to him somehow.
Yes.
I wonder if he's got a cell number. I'm sure he does.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Alan, for joining us on today's podcast. And we appreciate your insights into all of this and, all things Rome. And we look forward to seeing more news from you in the future and having additional conversations, because hopefully we'll have some great things to discuss, as more happens. And, we see this papacy play out and what kind of conversations, could he hold leaders in the world to account? Could he bring them to a place where they will look again at some of the stances that some countries around the world, including some states in our country, are taking now, and how we might need to reverse course and go a better way where we will protect every human life.
Yeah, well, let's see your words to God's ear.
Yeah, let's pray. And thank you to all of you who listened today. Do you want to know what you can do to help this podcast reach more people? It's easy. Hit the like button, leave us a 5-star review, or send this podcast to a friend. Lastly, remember you can support our efforts while drinking delicious coffee when you purchase 7 Weeks Pro-Life Coffee through the link on our website at kfl.org. Until next time, never forget, the pro-life movement is on the right side of history. Stay strong. The truth will overcome. Thanks, friends, and we will see you soon.